Tonight we slip beneath the waves, leaving behind the familiar world of light and air to explore the strange, suffocating birth of the deep-sea diving suit. You stand on the deck of a salvage vessel, the wooden planks slick with salt spray, as a team of men wrestle with what looks like a medieval suit of armor crossed with a steam engine's boiler. A heavy copper helmet, fitted with tiny glass portholes, sits waiting to be lowered onto your shoulders, and you can already feel the weight of it in your imagination, a weight that, once you're underwater, you probably won't survive if anything goes wrong. But that's the gamble of the 19th century, when going beneath the surface meant trusting your life to riveted canvas, hand-cranked air pumps, and a whole lot of hope. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, watching the waves slap against the hull, and you realize that for most of human history, the ocean floor has been as unreachable as the surface of the moon. You've heard stories, of course, tales of pearl divers in the East who could hold their breath for 4 minutes, of Greek sponge fishermen who risked their lungs descending 30 feet on a single lungful of air. These men returned with bulging eyes and bleeding ears, if they returned at all. They understood the pressure, even if they couldn't measure it. You feel it yourself when you dive just a few feet down in a calm lagoon, that sharp pain in your eardrums, the squeeze that tells you the water is pushing back against the air inside you. Now imagine going deeper. Much deeper. The problem has always been the same. You are a creature of air, designed to live at the bottom of an atmospheric ocean, and every 10 meters of water above you adds another entire atmosphere of weight. By the time you reach 30 meters, you're carrying the equivalent of 4 times the normal pressure on your body. Your lungs, which happily expand and contract at the surface, would be crushed into the size of oranges if you tried to breathe that deep without protection. So, if you want to visit the seabed and come back to tell the tale, you need to bring your own bubble of surface pressure with you. You need a machine that lets you be underwater without actually being in water. And that's what brings you to this deck, in this century, watching the first real attempts to build that machine. Earlier experiments have been crude, almost comically dangerous. You've read about men stuffed into wooden barrels with armholes sealed with wax, or leather-covered suits that inflated like grotesque balloons, ripping apart at the seams the moment the pressure outside grew too great. One inventor in the 1700s sent a man down in a suit made entirely of leather tubes, which immediately collapsed around his body, squeezing him so tightly that he had to be cut free, purple-faced and gasping. You shudder at the thought. But now, in the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and with it comes the ability to pump air, reliable, continuous air, down to a man standing on the ocean floor. You watch as the diving tender checks the final connections on the air pump, a brass and iron contraption that looks like a fire engine's hand pump but with a hose leading over the side. This is the heart of the operation, because without that steady stream of air, your suit becomes a coffin. The pump is manned by 2 strong men who will spend the entire dive cranking handles, pushing air down a leather hose, and hoping that nothing kinks or breaks. You'll be connected to them by that single thread of life, and you'll learn to listen for its rhythm, for the reassuring hiss that means you're still breathing. If the cranking stops, you have maybe a minute of air left in your helmet, and then, well, you try not to think about then. The suit itself lies on the deck like the shed skin of some metal serpent. It's made of layers of rubberized canvas, thick, stiff, and smelling of tar and vulcanized rubber, with arms and legs that end in heavy cuffs. The boots are solid brass, each one weighing nearly 15 pounds, and you'll need help just to stand up once they're on your feet. The helmet is the masterpiece, though. Polished copper, with a screw-on breastplate that attaches to the suit's collar, it has 3 small windows, one in front, one on each side. You'll peer through thick glass, your breath fogging the pain, and see a world no human has ever truly inhabited. The helmet connects to the air hose via a brass fitting at the back, and it also has a one-way exhaust valve that lets stale air escape. In theory. In practice, that valve sometimes jams, or lets water in, and then you learn what real panic feels like. The tender taps the glass on your helmet, a sharp double knock that you feel more than hear, and you realize this is the only way anyone can communicate with you once you leave the surface. Your world is about to become very small, very dark, and very, very quiet. You give a thumbs up, a gesture that's already becoming standard among divers, though it feels strange to use it here, underwater, where no one can actually see you through the murk. But the men on deck can see you, or at least they can see the top of your helmet as you stand at the rail, and that thumbs up means you're ready. It means you trust the pump, the hoses, the seals, and the men who tightened them. It means you're willing to step off the ladder and let the sea swallow you whole. You turn toward the ladder bolted to the side of the ship, and the weight of the suit immediately reminds you that you're no longer in your body, you're in a machine. The boots clang against the wood, each step requiring a conscious effort to lift your foot and swing it forward. The copper helmet, which felt heavy enough on deck, now seems to compress your spine as you lean out over the water. You grip the ladder's iron rungs with hands encased in thick rubber mittens, and you feel nothing, no texture, no temperature, just the pressure of your grip transmitted through layers of insulation. You descend one rung at a time, and with each step, the water rises higher up your body. First your boots disappear beneath the surface, and you feel the sudden coolness seeping through the rubber, a chill that will only deepen as you go down. Then your knees, then your waist. The water reaches the breastplate, and you hear a strange gurgling sound as air bubbles escape from around your neck seal. This is normal, you've been told, just the excess pressure evening out. Then the water covers your viewports, and everything goes green. For a moment, you're blind. The surface light scatters through the water, casting shifting patterns across your glass, but you can't make out anything solid. You look up and see the distorted silhouette of the boat's hull, the ladder disappearing into the gloom above you. You look down and see nothing, just an endless gradient of green fading to black. You release the ladder and you fall, slowly, because the suit is heavy but the water buoys you just enough to make your descent feel dreamlike, a gentle sinking through layers of temperature and pressure. Your ears pop, and you feel the squeeze on your body increase, but the air pump keeps hissing, keeps feeding you breathable atmosphere at exactly the pressure needed to keep the water from crushing you. You're a bubble of surface, sinking into the deep. And then your boots hit bottom. You feel it through the thick soles, a soft thud followed by the sensation of sinking slightly into silt. You stand there for a moment, adjusting to the strange sensation of being upright on the seabed, and you realize you're breathing faster than you should be. The hiss of the air pump seems louder now, more insistent, and you force yourself to slow down, to take longer breaths, to let the rhythm of the machine become your own. You look around, and your eyes begin to adjust to the dim light filtering from above. You're in about 30 feet of water, shallow by diving standards, but already the world looks alien. The sandy bottom stretches out before you, dotted with rocks and the occasional tuft of seaweed. Small fish dart past your viewports, curious about this strange metal creature that has landed in their midst. You take a step, and the movement feels ponderous, like walking on the moon. Each footfall raises a small cloud of silt that slowly drifts away on an invisible current. This is the moment that the first divers must have experienced with a mixture of awe and terror. You're breathing underwater. You're standing on ground that has never known a human footprint. And you're connected to the surface by nothing more than a hose and a rope, your lifeline and your communication line combined. The tender will occasionally tug on that rope to ask if you're all right, and you'll tug back to answer. 3 tugs means I'm fine, send more air. 4 means pull me up. And a constant, desperate jerking means something has gone very, very wrong. You hope you never have to learn what that feels like. Historians still argue whether the first successful deep-sea diving suit was truly safe, or if the early adopters were simply lucky. The technology was so new, so untested, that every dive was essentially an experiment. You read about the Dean brothers in the 1820s, who invented a smoke helmet for fighting fires in enclosed spaces and then realized it worked just as well underwater. Their design was simple, a copper helmet with a weighted belt, supplied by a surface pump, but with no waterproof suit attached. The diver simply wore ordinary clothes, and the helmet sat on his shoulders, allowing excess air to escape out the bottom. This meant you had to stay upright, because if you tipped over, the helmet would flood and you'd drown. But it worked, after a fashion. You could walk on the seabed for an hour, breathing surface air, and return with stories of shipwrecks and treasure. It was dangerous, uncomfortable, and absolutely revolutionary. The lesser-known detail that surprises most people is that these early divers often reported feeling drunk. Not metaphorically, literally intoxicated, with the bends of laughter and confusion, as the nitrogen in their compressed air began to affect their nervous system. They didn't understand it at the time. They just knew that if you went deep enough, you started to feel giddy, reckless, sometimes even hallucinatory. You might see strange colors, hear music that wasn't there, or become convinced that a fish was trying to talk to you. This was nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, and it killed more than a few divers who, in their euphoria, forgot to check their air supply or wandered too far from their tenders. You feel a faint echo of it even here, in shallow water, a slight lightheadedness that might be the pressure, or might just be the sheer strangeness of breathing underwater. You decide not to dwell on it. You begin to walk, following the gentle slope of the seabed toward deeper water. Each step sends up puffs of silt, and you leave a trail of footprints that will vanish within minutes, erased by the current. You pass a cluster of rocks encrusted with barnacles, and you reach out to touch them, your rubber mittens scraping against the sharp shells. The sensation is muted, distant, like feeling through a thick glove on a winter day. You're aware of the cold now, too. It's seeped through the rubber, through the layers of wool you're wearing underneath, and settled into your bones. You'll be shivering by the time you surface, even in summer, because water steals heat 25 times faster than air. The suit keeps you dry, mostly, but it doesn't keep you warm. That's a problem that won't be solved for decades. You look up and see the surface as a shimmering mirror far above you, distorted by waves and distance. It looks impossibly far away, even though you know it's only 30 feet. And for the first time, you fully understand what it means to be down here, in this silent, heavy world, where your life depends on a hose and a rope and two men cranking a pump who might get tired, or distracted, or just decide to take a break. You push the thought aside and keep walking. There's work to do, salvage to recover, inspections to make, a seabed to explore. And despite everything, despite the cold and the fear and the weight, you can't deny that there's something magical about this. You're breathing underwater. You're walking on the ocean floor. And somewhere above you, the sun is shining on a world you'll return to, if you're lucky, if the hose holds, if the pump keeps running. But for now, you're here. And that's enough. You've been walking on the seabed for perhaps 20 minutes when you notice something changing in the quality of the light. The green has deepened, shifting toward a murky blue, and the world around you has grown noticeably darker. You glance up and realize the surface is farther away now. You've been following the slope downward, almost without thinking, drawn by the promise of whatever lies in the deeper water. The tender's rope trails behind you, a thin lifeline disappearing into the gloom, and you give it a gentle tug, just to remind yourself that someone is up there, holding the other end. A moment later, you feel two tugs in response. We're here, we've got you, and you relax, just a little. The bottom here is different. The sand has given way to a fine gray silt, soft and treacherous, and your heavy boots sinking up to the ankles with every step. You move more slowly now, carefully, because you've heard stories of divers who stepped into hidden crevices or dropped into sudden holes, their suits filling with water before anyone could pull them up. You test each step before committing your full weight, and the effort makes you breathe harder, fogging your viewport until you pause to let it clear. The hiss of the air pump seems distant now, muffled by the depth, but you can still hear it if you concentrate, a rhythmic chuffing that reminds you that the surface still exists, that there's still a world of light and air waiting for you. And then you see it, a dark shape looming out of the murk ahead, too regular to be a rock, too large to be a fish. You stop, your heart pounding against the inside of your rubberized suit, and you stare at the shape as it slowly resolves into something recognizable. It's a ship's bow, jutting up from the seabed at a crazy angle, its wooden planks covered in a shaggy coat of seaweed and barnacles. The bowsprit points toward the surface like an accusing finger, and you can see the remains of rigging trailing from it, thin ropes that wave gently in the current like ghostly fingers. You found a wreck. This is what the early divers lived for, the wrecks. The sea floor of the 19th century is littered with the bones of ships, lost to storms and reefs and the simple perils of navigation, and each one represents a fortune in salvage. Copper sheathing, brass fittings, iron cannons, even the cargo itself, all of it lies waiting for someone brave enough, or desperate enough, to go down and bring it back up. You approach the wreck slowly, your boots disturbing the silt and sending up clouds that drift across the hull. The ship is old, perhaps a century or more, and its wooden ribs show through gaps in the planking like the skeleton of some enormous beast. You reach out and touch it, and your rubber mitten comes away covered in a slimy film of marine growth. The salvage divers of the 19th century developed techniques that would be familiar to you, even if their equipment seems primitive by modern standards. They would descend with canvas bags and ropes, attaching them to valuable items so that the surface crew could haul them up. Sometimes they worked in pairs, one diver guiding the cargo while the other secured the lines. And always they fought against the clock, against the limits of their air supply, against the cold that numbed their fingers, against the narcosis that clouded their judgment. A typical dive might last an hour, maybe two if the pump crew was strong and the diver was experienced. Then came the slow ascent, the decompression stops that they didn't yet understand, and the long shivering wait on deck while the next diver took their turn. What you probably don't know, what almost no one knows unless they've studied the old diving manuals, is that these divers often worked completely blind. The viewports in their helmets were small and prone to fogging, and the water in harbors and estuaries was frequently so murky that visibility dropped to zero. They would feel their way around wrecks, their hands tracing the contours of cannons and cargo boxes, identifying objects by touch alone. They learned to read the seabed through their boots, to distinguish between rock and timber and metal by the way it felt underfoot. And when they found something worth bringing up, they would signal the surface by tugging on their rope in a specific pattern, a code that meant "I found something, lower a line." It was slow, painstaking work, and it required a patience that most people simply don't possess. Historians still argue whether the salvage operations of this era were genuinely profitable, or if the romance of treasure hunting blinded investors to the real costs. The equipment was expensive, the divers demanded high wages, as well they should, given the risks, and the losses were frequent. Suits tore on sharp wreckage, hoses kinked or broke, and divers died from causes that no one yet understood. But every now and then, a salvage crew would hit pay dirt, a wreck carrying Spanish silver, or a cargo of copper ingots worth a small fortune, and the stories of those successes would fuel another generation of dreamers. You look at the wreck before you and wonder what it carried, what secrets lie buried in the silt around its hull. Perhaps there's silver down there. Perhaps there's just ballast stone and broken pottery. You'll never know, because you're not equipped for salvage, not today. You're just a visitor, a tourist from the surface, here to witness the strangeness of this underwater world. But even as you think this, you notice something else, a dark opening in the ship's hull, where the planking has rotted away to reveal the interior. It gapes like a mouth, and you can see nothing beyond it but absolute blackness. Your heart rate picks up again, because every instinct you have tells you to stay out of that hole, to avoid enclosed spaces where the silt could collapse or your hose could snag. But there's also a pull, a curiosity that you can't quite suppress. What's inside? What would you find if you ducked through that opening and swam into the darkness? The early divers must have felt this too, this tension between survival and discovery, between the sensible choice and the irresistible lure of the unknown. You stand at the edge of the wreck, your boots sinking slowly into the silt, and you weigh the options. The hiss of the air pump seems to grow louder, as if reminding you that your time is limited, that you can't stay down here forever. You make your decision. You step back from the wreck, just a step, and then another. The darkness of that opening will have to wait for another diver, another day. You're not ready for that kind of risk, not yet. Instead, you turn and begin to walk back the way you came, following the gentle slope upward toward the lighter water. The rope tugs at your waist, guiding you, and you follow it like Ariadne's thread leading you out of the labyrinth. Behind you, the wreck disappears into the murk, swallowed by the deep, waiting for someone braver, or more foolish, to explore its secrets. You tell yourself you'll come back, maybe with better equipment, maybe with a partner. But even as you think it, you know that's probably not true. Some places are meant to remain undisturbed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. You're climbing now, or rather, you're walking up a slope that gradually brings you closer to the surface. The light improves with every step, shifting from murky blue back to that familiar green, and you can see your own bubbles rising past your viewport, fat silver spheres that catch the light and dance upward toward the world you left behind. The rope still trails behind you, but now it's slack, because the tender knows you're coming up and has stopped paying out line. You give it a gentle tug, just to confirm that you're still connected, still alive, still part of the world above. 3 tugs come back almost immediately, and you smile inside your helmet, a private expression that no one can see. But as you walk, you begin to notice something strange. Your joints ache, not from exertion but from something deeper, something that feels like pressure building inside your bones. Your knees and elbows throb with a dull pain that you can't quite localize, and your breathing has become shallow and quick despite the easy slope. You stop for a moment, leaning against a convenient rock, and try to figure out what's wrong. The hiss of the air pump sounds normal, the seals on your suit feel intact, and you haven't taken on any water. So why do you feel like someone is driving nails into your joints? You've just encountered one of the great mysteries of early diving, a mystery that would kill and cripple countless men before anyone understood what was happening. The divers called it the bends, because it made them bend over in agony, or Cassoon disease, because it first appeared in workers building bridge foundations in pressurized cassoons. But the cause remained elusive for decades. All they knew was that if you went deep enough, and stayed down long enough, and came up too quickly, your body would rebel. You might feel fine during the ascent, only to collapse on deck an hour later, your limbs twisted with pain, your speech slurred, your vision blurred. Some died. Others were paralyzed for life. A lucky few recovered completely, only to risk it again on the next dive. You're experiencing a mild case now, because you've been down for nearly an hour at moderate depth, and your ascent has been too fast. The nitrogen that dissolved into your tissues under pressure is now coming out of solution, forming bubbles in your blood and joints, exactly like opening a bottle of carbonated water too quickly. Those bubbles are what cause the pain, pressing on nerves and blocking blood flow. If you were deeper, or if you'd stayed down longer, those bubbles could travel to your spine or your brain, and then you'd be in serious trouble. But here, in the shallows, you'll probably just ache for a few hours and learn a valuable lesson about the importance of slow ascents. The early divers had no such understanding, of course. They came up as fast as their tenders could haul them, eager to escape the cold and darkness, and then they suffered the consequences without knowing why. You read about the bridge workers on the Brooklyn Bridge in the 1870s, men who spent their days in pressurized caissons deep under the riverbed, and then emerged into normal air with what they called the caisson disease. It struck without warning, felling strong men in their prime, and the doctors had no idea what caused it or how to treat it. They tried everything: bleeding, massage, opium, whiskey, but nothing worked consistently. It wasn't until the end of the century that a French physiologist named Paul Bout figured out that the bubbles were nitrogen, and that the only prevention was a slow, controlled ascent. You push off from the rock and continue your climb, but now you're more careful, more deliberate. You pause every few steps, letting your body adjust, giving those nitrogen bubbles time to reabsorb. The pain in your joints gradually subsides, replaced by a dull ache that you can live with. And as you rise, you notice other changes. The water temperature is warming, the light is brightening, and you can see the surface as a rippling mirror just above you. You look up and watch your bubbles break through that mirror, popping into the air, and you feel an overwhelming longing to follow them, to feel the sun on your face and the wind on your skin. But you force yourself to wait, to climb slowly, because you've learned something today about patience and pressure and the strange physics of being human underwater. The lesser-known detail that sticks with you, even as you ascend, is that the bends weren't the only mysterious illness that plagued early divers. There was also something called diver's palsy, a creeping paralysis that could strike days after a dive, and the chokes, a terrifying condition where nitrogen bubbles formed in the lungs, making every breath a struggle. And then there were the deaths that no one could explain, divers who surfaced apparently healthy, only to collapse and die within hours, their autopsies revealing nothing obvious. It took decades of research, and thousands of deaths, before the full picture emerged. Even now, you realize, diving is not perfectly safe. It's just safer than it used to be, because we understand the enemy. You break the surface with a gasp that's more emotional than physical. You've been breathing just fine down there, but something about seeing the sky again makes you want to fill your lungs with real, unfiltered air. The tender and his crew are there, reaching for your helmet, helping you up the ladder, their hands gripping your arms with a firmness that feels almost paternal. They lift the heavy copper helmet from your shoulders, and the sudden lightness makes you stagger, as if your head might float away without the weight to anchor it. You breathe deeply, tasting salt and ship's tar and the sweet, sweet air of the surface. You're back. But even as you stand on the deck, shivering in the wind, you're aware that you've changed. You've seen something that most humans will never see, felt something that most will never feel. You've walked on the ocean floor, breathed through a hose, stood in the presence of a wreck that hasn't seen sunlight in a century. And you know, with a certainty that settles into your bones alongside the cold, that you'll go down again. Not today, maybe not even this year, but someday. Because once you've visited that world, once you've felt its weight in silence and strange beauty, it never quite lets you go. The surface feels thin now, insubstantial. You're back in the world of air, but part of you is still down there, still walking through the green gloom, still chasing the mystery of the deep. You're sitting on a wooden crate on the deck, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, watching the crew prepare for the next dive. The sun is warm on your face, a sharp contrast to the bone-deep cold that still lingers in your limbs, and you sip from a tin cup of something hot, tea, heavily sweetened, the universal remedy for everything that ails a working diver. Your hands shake slightly as you hold the cup, whether from cold or delayed adrenaline you can't quite tell. The tender glances at you occasionally, checking for signs of something worse than simple shivering, but you give him a nod that says you're fine, just give me a minute. The next diver is already suited up, standing at the rail with his helmet tucked under one arm while he waits for the final checks. He's younger than you, maybe 25, with the kind of eager confidence that comes from not having made enough mistakes yet. You watch him joke with the pump crew, slapping one of them on the shoulder, and you remember being that age, that certain of your own invulnerability. He'll learn. They all learn, one way or another. The sea is a patient teacher, and it never runs out of lessons. You think about what you just experienced down there, not just the wreck, not just the cold, but the strange, dreamlike quality of the whole descent. The way time seemed to stretch and compress, the way your thoughts drifted and circled, the way the hiss of the air pump became a kind of meditation. You've heard other divers describe similar sensations, but you've never been able to put words to it yourself. It's not quite fear, though fear is there at the edges. It's not quite peace, though peace is there too. It's something else, something that only happens when you're suspended between two worlds, neither fully of the surface nor fully of the deep. This liminal state, this underwater trance, has fascinated observers since the earliest days of diving. You read accounts from the 1830s of divers who claimed to have spoken with sea creatures, or seen cities on the seabed, or heard music that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, these stories were dismissed as the fantasies of uneducated men, or the exaggerations of sailors spinning yarns. But as more divers went down, and more stories emerged, a pattern began to form. Something was happening to their minds down there, something that couldn't be explained by simple imagination. The French physiologists would later identify it as nitrogen narcosis, but even they admitted that the phenomenon was stranger and more complex than simple intoxication. The deep does something to the human brain, something that science is still struggling to understand. Historians still argue whether the early diving pioneers truly understood the psychological risks of their profession, or if they simply accepted madness as one more hazard alongside drowning and the bends. The diving manuals of the period are almost silent on the subject, focusing instead on equipment maintenance and salvage techniques. But the personal accounts tell a different story. You've read letters from divers describing hallucinations so vivid they seemed more real than the surface world, and logbooks recording incidents where divers had to be forcibly restrained from removing their helmets because they'd become convinced they could breathe water. One particularly chilling account from the 1850s describes a diver who surfaced laughing, insisting that he'd found a mermaid and was going back down to marry her. They had to lock him in the hold for the rest of the voyage. The younger diver gives you a wave as he settles his helmet onto his shoulders, the brass clanging against the breastplate with a sound that makes you wince. The tender does the final checks, tightening the wing nuts that seal the helmet to the suit, testing the airflow, checking the non-return valve that prevents water from rushing in if the hose breaks. Then the diver steps to the ladder and begins his descent, disappearing slowly into the green water, his bubbles marking his progress until even they vanish. You watch until the last bubble pops, and then you're alone on deck with the pump crew and the gentle creaking of the ship. You finish your tea and stand up, testing your legs. The ache in your joints has faded to a faint memory, and your hands have stopped shaking. You walk to the rail and look down into the water, trying to see what the younger diver is seeing. But there's nothing there but your own reflection and the occasional flash of a fish near the surface. You wonder if he's found the wreck, if he's brave enough to explore that dark opening you passed by. Part of you hopes he is, because someone should see what's inside. Part of you hopes he isn't, because you remember your own fear standing at that threshold, and you wouldn't wish that particular terror on anyone. The pump crew settles into a rhythm, their handles moving up and down in a steady cadence that you can feel through the deck. They'll keep this up for an hour, maybe two, trading off when their arms get tired, never stopping because stopping means death. It's exhausting work, physically demanding in a way that surface dwellers rarely appreciate, and the pumpmen deserve as much credit for a successful dive as the man in the suit. Without them, without their strong arms and steady rhythm, the diver is just a man in a heavy metal coffin. You make a mental note to thank them properly later, maybe with a round of drinks when you reach port. A tug on the signal line draws everyone's attention. One tug, "I'm fine, all is well." The tender acknowledges with two tugs, and the rhythm continues. You wonder what the younger diver is seeing down there, what thoughts are passing through his mind as he walks the same path you walked an hour ago. Is he feeling the same awe, the same fear, the same strange detachment? Or is he too young, too confident, to notice the weight of the water pressing in on him? You suspect he'll notice eventually. The deep has a way of making itself known, regardless of your age or experience. You sit back down on the crate, pulling the blanket tighter around your shoulders, and you let your mind drift. The sun is warm, the ship rocks gently, and the rhythmic chuff of the air pump becomes a kind of lullaby. You're tired, more tired than you realized, and your eyes keep closing no matter how hard you try to keep them open. The last thing you see before you drift off is the tender, standing at the rail with the signal line in his hand, watching the water with the patient vigilance of a man who knows that the sea gives no second chances. You wake with a start, unsure how long you've been asleep. The sun has shifted noticeably in the sky, and the shadows on deck have lengthened. The rhythmic chuff of the air pump continues unchanged, but something feels different, a tension in the air, a stillness among the crew that wasn't there before. You look toward the rail and see the tender standing rigid, the signal line taut in his hand, his face set in an expression you've learned to recognize over the years. It's the look of a man who's waiting for something, and not sure it's going to come. You rise from the crate and walk over, your boots loud on the wooden deck. "What's happening?" you ask, though you already know the answer. The tender doesn't take his eyes off the water. "Lost communication about 10 minutes ago. He was fine, working the wreck, then nothing. No tugs, no movement on the line. Just dead weight." Your stomach clenches. You've heard about this, read about it in the accident reports that divers share among themselves like sailors swapping stories of storms. A diver goes down, everything seems fine, and then suddenly the line goes slack or goes taut with a weight that isn't right. Sometimes it's an equipment failure, a hose that kinks, a valve that jams, a suit that tears on sharp wreckage. Sometimes it's something worse, something that happens inside the diver himself. A seizure, a blackout, a moment of panic that leads to fatal mistakes. And sometimes, you never know. The sea keeps its secrets. "How long since the last signal?" you ask. 12 minutes, the tender says. "Maybe 13. I've been counting." 12 minutes. If the diver's air supply is intact, he could survive for another hour or more. But if something's wrong, if his helmet is flooded or his hose is cut, then 12 minutes is an eternity. You've seen the statistics. Most diving fatalities occur within the first few minutes of a problem, because there's simply no time to fix what goes wrong down there. The surface is too far away, the help too slow. By the time anyone realizes you're in trouble, you're already beyond it. The pump crew keeps working, their faces pale but determined. They know that stopping the pump now, even if the diver is already dead, would be an admission of defeat they are not ready to make. As long as they keep pumping, there's hope. As long as air is going down that hose, the diver might still be breathing it. You watch them, these two men who have been cranking handles for hours, their arms surely burning with fatigue, and you feel a respect for them that goes beyond words. They are not heroes in the conventional sense. No medals, no headlines, but they are doing something heroic nonetheless. Another minute passes. 2. The tender pulls gently on the line, feeling for any response, any hint that the diver might still be conscious down there. Nothing. The line comes back with the same dead weight, heavy and unresponsive. He looks at you, and you see something in his eyes that you don't want to see. a resignation, a readiness for the worst. "I'm going down," you say. The tender shakes his head. "You're not suited. By the time you get dressed and descend, it'll be too late anyway." "Then send me down in what I'm wearing. Just the helmet and hose. I don't need the suit." It's a desperate idea, and you both know it. The Dean brothers' open helmet design would let you descend without a full suit, but it's risky even in ideal conditions. In cold water, with a potentially dead diver below, it's almost certainly foolish. But the tender looks at you, and you look at him, and something passes between you. An understanding that sometimes you have to try, even when trying is stupid. He nods. The next few minutes are a blur of activity. They strip off your blanket and help you into a heavy wool sweater, the same one you wore under your suit earlier, still damp and cold. Then they lift the copper helmet and lower it onto your shoulders, not bothering with the breastplate or the suit attachment. The helmet sits on your bare shoulders, the bottom edge resting against the wall, and you feel the cold metal against your neck. The tender connects the air hose and opens the valve, and you hear the familiar hiss of air filling the helmet. It's louder now, because the air is escaping freely around the bottom edge, but that's fine. That's how this design works. You don't bother with weighted boots or a heavy belt. You'll descend using the ladder and then swim down, trusting the weight of the helmet to keep you oriented. It's a terrible plan, objectively speaking. You know this. Everyone on deck knows this. But no one says anything, because what is there to say? You step to the ladder and begin your descent. The cold hits you immediately, worse than before because you don't have the insulating layers of the suit. The water floods around your neck, up into the helmet, and you gasp as it reaches your chin. But the air pressure keeps it from rising higher. As long as you stay upright and the pump keeps running, the air forms a bubble inside the helmet, pushing the water down to your shoulders. You can breathe, barely, but you can feel the cold sapping your strength with every passing second. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before hypothermia sets in. Maybe less. You descend as quickly as you can, hand over hand down the ladder, then pushing off into open water. The weight of the helmet helps, dragging you down, but you have to fight to keep yourself oriented, to keep from tipping over and letting the water flood in. You kick your feet, uselessly, because you're wearing ordinary boots with no fins, and your progress is agonizingly slow. The green water darkens around you, and you search for any sign of the diver below. And then you see him, a dark shape on the seabed, motionless, his copper helmet catching what little light filters down. He's lying on his side, his body half buried in the silt, and even from here you can see that something is wrong with his air hose. It's kinked, sharply, almost folded back on itself where it connects to his helmet. That's why he stopped signaling, not because he's dead, necessarily, but because the kink cut off his air, and he probably blacked out from lack of oxygen. If you can straighten the hose, if you can get air flowing again, he might still be alive. Might be. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot. You kick toward him, your limbs already numb with cold, your vision blurring from the effort of staying upright. The helmet feels impossibly heavy now, dragging you down, and you realize too late that you've made a terrible mistake. You're not equipped for this. You're not trained for this. You're just a man in a copper bowl, sinking toward a dead man on the seabed, and the cold is stealing your strength faster than you anticipated. You reach the younger diver just as your own vision begins to tunnel, the cold and the effort combining to steal the edges of your awareness. You fumble for his air hose, your numb fingers barely able to grip the thick rubber, and you feel along its length until you find the kink, a sharp bend where the hose caught on a piece of wreckage, pinching shut like a folded straw. You pull at it, trying to straighten it, but your hands won't cooperate. They feel like blocks of wood attached to your wrists, clumsy and useless. You pull again, and this time the hose shifts slightly, enough to let a trickle of air through. You hear a faint hiss, and you pray that it's reaching his helmet, that he's still alive to breathe it. But now you have another problem. You're cold, so cold that your teeth are chattering inside the helmet, and your limbs are beginning to shake uncontrollably. The shaking is dangerous. It makes you move erratically, threatens to tip you sideways and flood your helmet. You force yourself to be still, to breathe slowly, to assess the situation with whatever clarity you have left. The younger diver lies motionless beside you, his faceplate fogged so you can't see inside. The kink in his hose is partially straightened now, but you don't know if it's enough. You don't know anything, really, except that you can't stay down here much longer. You tug on his signal line, 3 sharp pulls, the universal signal for pull me up. Then you tug on your own, the same pattern, hoping the tender understands that you need both of you raised, and quickly. You wrap your arms around the younger diver's torso, gripping the heavy canvas of his suit, and you wait. The seconds stretch into what feels like hours. Your shaking worsens. Your thoughts become fragments, disconnected images. The sun on the deck, the taste of sweet tea, the face of someone you loved a long time ago. You wonder if this is how it ends, down here in the green gloom, holding a stranger who might already be dead. And then you feel it, a tug on the line, then another, then a steady pull that lifts you both off the seabed. The tender understood. The crew is hauling you up, hand over hand, dragging you through the water toward the surface. You hold onto the younger diver with the last of your strength, your arms locked around him like a vice, and you rise together through the layers of cold and pressure. The light brightens, the water warms slightly, and then you break the surface with a gasp that's half water, half air. Hands reach for you, pulling you onto the deck, separating you from the younger diver. You lie on the wooden planks, shivering uncontrollably, while someone wraps you in blankets and someone else forces hot liquid between your lips. You try to speak, to ask about the other diver, but your jaw won't work properly. All you can do is lie there and shake and watch as the crew works on the younger man, removing his helmet, checking for breath, for pulse, for any sign of life. The tender is there, his face hovering above you, saying something you can't quite hear. You focus on his lips, trying to read the words. Alive, he seems to say. Coughed up water, breathing on his own. You close your eyes, and for the first time since you hit the water, you let yourself relax. He's alive. You don't know how, don't know if he'll have brain damage from the oxygen deprivation, but he's alive, and that's more than you had any right to hope for. The rest of the day passes in a blur. You're moved below decks, stripped of your wet clothes, wrapped in dry blankets, and put in a bunk with more hot drinks and a stern warning not to move until someone says you can. You sleep, or maybe you pass out. It's hard to tell the difference when your body has been through what yours just went through. When you wake, it's dark outside, and the ship is quiet except for the creak of timbers and the distant sound of waves against the hull. A lantern glows somewhere nearby, and in its light you see the younger diver sitting up in the bunk across from yours. He looks pale, drawn, decades older than he looked that morning. But he's awake, and when he sees you watching him, he nods. Just a nod, nothing more. But it's enough. It says everything that needs to be said. The story of what happened to him emerges over the following days, pieced together from his fragmented memories and the observations of the crew. He'd found the wreck, the same one you'd visited, and like you he'd been drawn to that dark opening in the hull. Unlike you, he'd gone in. He ducked through the gap and found himself inside the ship's hold, a cavernous space filled with silt and shadows and the remains of whatever cargo the vessel had carried. He'd been moving carefully, exploring, when his air hose snagged on a protruding beam. He tried to free it, but in the darkness he couldn't see what was caught, and his movements only made it worse. The hose kinked, the air stopped, and within seconds he was unconscious. He doesn't remember anything after that, not the blackout, not your descent, not the ascent to the surface. One moment he was inside the wreck, and the next he was on deck, coughing up seawater and wondering why everyone looked so worried. Historians still argue whether the open helmet dive you performed was technically a rescue or an act of profound stupidity. The diving manuals of the era contain no instructions for what you did, because no one in their right mind would consider it a viable technique. You descended without a proper suit, without weighted boots, without any of the equipment that made diving marginally safe. You relied on nothing but the copper helmet and the air hose, and you survived through a combination of luck, desperation, and the fact that the water was just shallow enough to let you reach the bottom before hypothermia claimed you. The textbooks would call it reckless. The divers who hear the story call it something else, but they only say it in private, over drinks, when the night is dark and the sea is calm. The lesser-known detail that emerges from this incident is one that the younger diver shares with you weeks later, after you've both recovered and returned to port. He tells you that during those final moments before he lost consciousness, he experienced something strange, a kind of peace, a detachment from his body and his situation, as if he were watching himself from outside. He felt no fear, no panic, just a calm acceptance that this was how it ended. He describes it as beautiful, in a way, and he says he's never told anyone else because he's afraid they won't understand. You do understand, though. You've felt something similar yourself, in moments of extreme danger, that strange dissociation that protects the mind from the full horror of what's happening. It's the brain's last gift to itself, a final mercy before the end. You're back on land now, and the solid ground feels strange beneath your feet after days of the deck's constant motion. The docks of the port town stretch out before you, a chaos of masts and rigging and the shouts of stevedores loading cargo. You walk slowly, still feeling the phantom sway of the ship in your inner ear, and you breathe air that smells of fish and tar and the peculiar mustiness of a working harbor. It's good to be back, even if part of you still feels like you're sinking through green water, even if your dreams are still filled with the hiss of air pumps and the sight of dark shapes looming out of the murk. The younger diver, his name is William, you've learned, walks beside you, still pale but recovering. He's quieter now than he was before the accident, more thoughtful, as if the experience has aged him in ways that have nothing to do with years. You've talked about what happened, about the wreck and the kinked hose and the rescue. But there are things you don't discuss, spaces you both leave empty out of respect for the boundaries that near-death creates. Maybe someday you'll fill them. Maybe you won't. Some experiences are meant to remain private, even between those who shared them. You're heading to a tavern near the docks, a place frequented by divers and sailors and the various hangers-on who make their living from the sea. It's called the Anchor and something. You can never remember the second word, and the sign is so weathered that even the regulars have given up trying to read it. Inside, it's dark and smoky and smells of spilled ale and old wood, and it's exactly the kind of place where diving stories are told and retold until they become legends. You push through the door and the noise washes over you. Laughter, arguments, the clink of glasses, the occasional outburst of song from a corner where someone's had too much rum. You find a table near the back, away from the worst of the crowd, and order 2 pints of whatever the barman recommends. He brings them over, dark ale with a head that foams over the rim, and you drink deeply, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. William sips his more slowly, watching the room with eyes that miss nothing. His learning, you realize. His learning to read people the way divers learn to read the seabed. By feel, by instinct, by paying attention to the small signs that most people overlook. The conversation around you is the usual mix of bravado and complaint. Someone's telling a story about a dive in the North Sea, where the cold was so intense that his suit froze solid on the ascent and he had to be chipped out of it like a statue. Someone else is complaining about a new diving helmet that leaks around the viewport, and the argument that follows involves a great deal of hand-waving and technical terminology that probably means different things to each participant. You listen with half an ear, letting the familiar rhythms wash over you, and you think about how strange it is that this noisy, smoky, slightly disreputable place feels more like home than anywhere else you've ever been. The history of diving is filled with places like this: taverns and inns and public houses where divers gathered to exchange information, to warn each other about dangerous wrecks or unreliable equipment, to mourn the ones who didn't come back. In the early days, before formal training programs and professional organizations, this was how knowledge spread. A chance conversation over ale could save your life, if you listened carefully enough. A story told by an old diver with a missing finger might contain the key to avoiding the same fate. You've learned more in places like this than you ever learned from books, and you suspect you always will. Historians still argue whether the informal networks of 19th century divers were more effective than formal training would have been. On one hand, the lack of standardization meant that every diver developed his own techniques, his own superstitions, his own ways of dealing with the dangers of the deep. Some of those techniques were brilliant innovations that would later become standard practice. Others were dangerously stupid, and the divers who used them tended not to last long enough to pass them on. Natural selection applied to diving. On the other hand, the camaraderie of places like this created a kind of collective wisdom that no single instructor could provide. When you sat in a tavern with 20 divers who'd survived hundreds of dives between them, you absorbed their knowledge through your skin, whether you realized it or not. The lesser-known detail that emerges from these gatherings is the role of superstition in early diving. You hear it in the stories: the divers who refused to dive on certain days, or who carried specific talismans, or who performed elaborate rituals before descending. Some of it was simple salvage, the kind of thing that seafarers have always practiced to appease whatever gods they believed in. But some of it was practical wisdom dressed up in supernatural clothing. The diver who insisted on spitting into his helmet before putting it on might not have known that the saliva helped prevent fogging, but he knew it worked. The diver who refused to dive if the air pump made a certain sound might have been responding to a subtle change in rhythm that he couldn't articulate but that warned of impending failure. Superstition was the language they used to express observations they couldn't otherwise explain. You finish your ale and order another, watching William as he gradually relaxes into the atmosphere of the place. He's starting to look less like a man who nearly died and more like a young diver with a future. The color is returning to his cheeks, and he's begun to participate in the conversations around him, asking questions, offering observations. He'll be all right, you think. He'll dive again, and he'll be better for what he's been through, more cautious, more aware, more respectful of the deep. Or maybe he'll quit, find another line of work, marry a nice girl and settle down far from the sea. You've seen both reactions, and you can't predict which way he'll go. That's his choice to make, his path to walk. The tavern grows louder as the evening wears on, and you find yourself thinking about the wreck, about that dark opening you refused to enter. You wonder what Williams saw in there, before the hose kinked and the world went black. You wonder if he'll ever tell you, or if that's another space you'll leave empty. Probably the latter. Some experiences are too personal to share, even with the man who pulled you from the seabed. You understand that, accept it, don't push. The deep gives everyone their own secrets, and it's not your place to steal them. The next morning comes too early, as mornings after tavern nights always do. You wake in a boarding house room that smells of mildew and old tobacco, your head throbbing gently in protest at the amount of ale you consumed. William is already up, sitting by the window, staring out at the harbor with an expression you can't quite read. He turns when you stare, and for a moment you see something in his eyes, a question, perhaps, or a decision waiting to be made. "I've been thinking," he says, "about going back down. To the wreck, I mean. Properly this time. With a partner. You sit up slowly, testing your head's tolerance for movement. It's not great, but it's acceptable. That's either very brave or very stupid, you say. Probably both. He almost smiles. I need to see it. Need to understand what happened. Not the accident, I know what happened there. I need to see what I was looking at when it happened. There was something in that hold, something I only glimpsed before the hose caught. I can't stop thinking about it. You wait. You've learned that silence is often more useful than questions. I think it was a chest, he continues. Metal bound, the kind they used for valuables. It was half buried in the silt, but I could see the corners, the shape of it. I think there might be something inside. Ah. Treasure. The oldest lure in the sea, the promise of wealth that has sent countless men to their deaths. You've seen it before, felt its pull yourself, and you know how dangerous it is. The rational part of your mind knows that the chances of finding anything valuable are slim, that most wrecks yield nothing but ballast and bones, that the real treasure is survival. But there's another part, older and less rational, that hears the word chest and sees Spanish gold, pieces of 8, enough wealth to leave the sea forever. That part is hard to ignore. What do you need? You ask. Someone who knows what they are doing. Someone who won't panic when things go wrong. Someone who's already saved my life once and might be willing to do it again. You look at him for a long moment. He's serious, you realize. He's not just talking. He's actually planning to go back down, to enter that black hole again, to risk everything for a glimpse of something that might be nothing. It's insane. It's also exactly what you would do in his position, and you both know it. All right, you say. But we do it my way. Proper suits, proper lines, proper communication. And we go in together, tethered to each other as well as to the surface. If one of us gets into trouble, the other pulls him out. No heroics, no solo explorations. Agreed. He nods. Agreed. The next few days are a blur of preparation. You inspect every inch of the diving suits, replacing worn gaskets and testing the non-return valves until you're satisfied they'll hold. You check the air hoses for weak spots, the signal lines for fraying, the helmets for any imperfection that could become a fatal leak. The pump crew, the same men who hauled you both from the seabed, agree to work the dive, and you go over the signals with them until everyone knows them by heart. 3 tugs for pull us up, 4 for emergency, a complex pattern of long and short pulls that will let you communicate basic information without words. It's not perfect, but it's what you have. The morning of the dive dawns clear and calm, the sea flat as glass, the sun warm on your shoulders. You stand on the deck of the salvage vessel, suited and ready, watching William go through his final checks. He's calm, focused, nothing like the eager boy who joked with the pump crew on your first dive. The accident has changed him, deepened him, made him into the kind of diver you'd trust with your life. Which is good, because that's exactly what you're about to do. You descend together, side by side, your boots finding the ladder rungs in unison. The water rises around you, cold and green, and you feel the familiar squeeze of pressure as you sink below the surface. You look at William through his viewport, and he looks back at you, and something passes between you. An acknowledgement that this is dangerous, that you might not come back, that you're choosing to do it anyway. Then you release the ladder and sink together toward the seabed. The bottom looks different today, or maybe you're just seeing it differently. The silt is undisturbed, the wreck exactly where you left it, its dark opening gaping like a wound in the hull. You land softly, your boots sinking slightly into the sediment, and you take a moment to orient yourself. William is beside you, his breathing steady through the hose, his eyes fixed on the wreck. You give his line a single tug, "I'm here, I'm ready," and he responds in kind. Then you begin to walk, together, toward the darkness. The opening is larger than you remembered, or maybe your memory in self-defense. It's big enough to admit a suited diver, barely, and the edges are jagged with broken planking. You approach it carefully, testing the seabed with each step, watching for anything that might snag a hose or line. William reaches it first and pauses, looking back at you. You nod, and he ducks through, disappearing into the blackness. You follow, your heart pounding against your ribs, your breath loud in your ears. Inside, it's dark. Darker than anything you've experienced, darker than a moonless night, darker than the inside of your own eyelids. Your viewport shows nothing but black, and for a terrifying moment you're blind, completely blind, floating in a void that could contain anything or nothing. Then your eyes begin to adjust, and you realize there's light after all, a faint, diffuse glow filtering through gaps in the hull, just enough to see shapes, outlines, the barest suggestion of form. You see William ahead of you, a darker shape against the darkness, and you follow him deeper into the hold. The hold opens around you like the interior of a cathedral, vast, shadowed, filled with the detritus of a century beneath the waves. Your eyes continue to adjust, and slowly the darkness resolves into shapes you can recognize. Beams cross above you, encrusted with marine growth. The hull curves away on either side, its planks bowed inward from the pressure of years. And below you, covering the floor of the hold in a thick, uneven layer, is the silt, fine as powdered sugar, treacherous as quicksand, hiding whatever secrets this ship carried to its grave. You move carefully, each step raising a cloud of sediment that drifts slowly away in the currents. William is ahead of you, his hand trailing along a beam as he navigates through the gloom. You watch his hose, making sure it doesn't snag on any of the projections that jut from every surface. The wreck is a maze of potential traps, broken spars, fallen rigging, cargo that shifted and spilled when the ship went down. One wrong move and you could be entangled, trapped, your air supply cut off like William's nearly was. You stay close, tethered by more than just the rope that connects you. And then you see it. Ahead of William, half buried in the silt, a shape that doesn't belong to the ship. It's rectangular, regular, with corners that meet at right angles, something made by human hands, not by nature. You tap William's shoulder and point, and he nods, having already seen it. Together you approach, your steps even slower now, more deliberate, as if the silt might swallow you if you move too quickly. It is a chest. Metal bound, as William said, with iron straps that have rusted to a rough orange-brown but still hold their shape. The wood between them is dark with age and water, but it's intact, remarkably intact, considering how long it's been down here. You reach out and touch it, your rubber mittens scraping against the metal, and you feel the solidity of it, the weight of it half sunk in the sediment. Whatever's inside, if anything is inside, it's been waiting a long time to be found. You look at William, and even through the fogged glass of his viewport you can see the excitement in his eyes. This is what he came for, what he nearly died for. This moment of discovery, this contact with the past. You tug on his line, a signal that means careful, and he nods, understanding. You both know that opening the chest could be dangerous. It could be filled with silt that will explode into the water and blind you. It could be booby-trapped, though that's unlikely after so many years. Or it could simply be empty, a disappointment that would make the whole dive feel foolish. But you have to know. You have to look inside. You work together, using your hands to clear the silt from around the chest. It's slow work, tedious work, each handful of sediment drifting away to reveal more of the box beneath. The chest is larger than you thought, maybe 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, deep enough to hold something substantial. The lid is hinged with iron fittings that still move, stiffly, when you test them. You position yourselves on either side, take hold of the lid's edge, and lift. It opens with a groan, a sound that travels through the water and into your bones. And inside, nestled in what was once packing material but is now just a dark, organic sludge, you see something that makes your breath catch in your throat. Metal. Round discs, stacked in columns, their edges just visible through the muck. You reach in and lift one out, rub away the silt, and stare at what you're holding. It's a coin. Silver, by the look of it, though it's tarnished almost black. You can make out markings on one side, a shield, some lettering in a language you don't recognize. You hand it to William, who examines it with the same awe, then reaches in and pulls out another. And another. The chest is full of them, hundreds of them, a fortune in silver waiting to be brought to the surface. Historians still argue whether the salvage of treasure from wrecks like this one was a net benefit to the divers who found it. On one hand, a single successful salvage could make you rich beyond your dreams, able to retire from diving forever and live in comfort on shore. On the other hand, the sudden wealth often brought its own problems. Jealousy from other divers, legal battles with whoever claimed ownership of the wreck, and the simple fact that most divers, having spent their lives in danger, had no idea how to manage a fortune. Many a treasure diver ended up broke within a few years, having spent his wealth on drink and bad investments, and went back to diving because it was the only thing he knew how to do. The lesser-known detail about treasure salvage is how often the most valuable finds weren't gold or silver at all. Copper sheathing, for example, was worth a small fortune when recycled, and many wrecks were stripped of every last sheet. Brass fittings, lead ballast, even the iron cannons, all of it could be sold, melted down, turned into something useful. The romantic image of the treasure diver is all about glittering coins and jewel-encrusted artifacts, but the reality was often more prosaic. You made your living by stripping wrecks of anything that could be sold, and if you happened to find a chest of silver along the way, that was just a bonus. You and William work quickly now, filling canvas bags with the coins, being careful not to damage them or lose any in the silt. The work is absorbing, almost meditative, and you lose track of time until a tug on your signal line reminds you that the surface still exists, that the pump crew is still up there, that you have limits. You tug back, "We're fine, give us more time," and continue working, but now you're aware of the clock, of the air you've been breathing, of the nitrogen building in your tissues. You'll need to ascend soon, to decompress slowly, to give your bodies time to adjust. You fill the last bag and tie it closed, then look at William. He's holding one last coin, turning it over in his hands, his expression unreadable. Then he tucks it inside his suit, close to his chest, and nods at you. You're ready. You take hold of the bags, distribute the weight between you, and begin the slow walk out of the hold, out of the wreck, back toward the light. The ascent is a study in patience, a lesson you've learned the hard way and have no desire to repeat. You rise slowly, so slowly that the seabed seems to recede beneath you at the pace of a crawling glacier. Every few feet you pause, letting your body adjust, giving the nitrogen time to exit your tissues gradually rather than explosively. The bags of coins hang from your belt, heavy reminders of what you found, and you're acutely aware that this weight makes you more vulnerable, more likely to sink if something goes wrong. But you manage, you and William together, rising through the green water like bubbles released from the deep. The surface approaches with agonizing slowness. You can see it above you, a rippling mirror that seems impossibly far away despite being only 30 feet distant. Your lungs ache for real air, even though you've been breathing just fine through the hose. It's a psychological thing, you know, the knowledge that there's an infinite supply of fresh atmosphere just above you, and you can't reach it yet. You force yourself to wait, to pause at each stop, to let the minutes stretch into what feels like hours. Finally, after what seems like an eternity, you break the surface. The transition is always jarring. One moment you're in the green world, muffled and heavy, and the next you're in the world of light and sound, with hands reaching for you and voices shouting and the sudden shocking brightness of the sun. They lift your helmet first, and you gasp, filling your lungs with air that tastes sweeter than anything you've ever breathed. Then they haul you onto the deck, bags and all, and you lie there for a moment, staring up at the sky, feeling the solidity of the ship beneath you. William surfaces beside you, and they lift his helmet too. His grinning, a wide, boyish grin that transforms his face, makes him look like the eager young diver you met weeks ago. He reaches into his suit and pulls out the coin he kept, holding it up to the light, watching it gleam despite its tarnish. The crew gathers around, staring at it, and then at the bags, and then at you, and the questions begin. What is it? Where did you find it? How much is there? You answer as best you can, but the truth is you don't know yet. You won't know until you can clean the coins, examine them, figure out what you've actually found. The next few days are a whirlwind of activity. You clean the coins carefully, using fresh water and soft cloths, watching as the silver emerges from its centuries of darkness. They are Spanish, you determine, pieces of 8, minted in Mexico in the early 1700s, carrying the crest of King Philip V. There are over 500 of them, enough to make you wealthy by any reasonable standard. You and William stare at them spread out on a table in your boarding house room, and neither of you can quite believe what you're seeing. Historians still argue whether the discovery of treasure changes people for better or worse. In your case, it changes everything and nothing. You're still a diver, still drawn to the sea, still aware that every descent could be your last. But now you have options you didn't have before. You could retire, buy a house somewhere far from the coast, live quietly on your share of the silver. Or you could invest in better equipment, fund more ambitious salvage operations, become something more than just another working diver. The choice is yours, and for the first time in your life, you have the luxury of making it. William makes his choice quickly. He's going to stay in diving, he tells you, but he's going to do it differently. He wants to study the physiology of it, understand why the bends happen and how to prevent them. He wants to write a manual, share what he's learned, make diving safer for everyone who comes after. The treasure will fund his research, pay for his education, give him the time he needs to pursue knowledge instead of just survival. You look at him and see not the boy who nearly died, but the man he's becoming, serious, purposeful, determined to make a difference. Your own choice takes longer. You sit with the coins, turning them over in your hands, feeling their weight in history. Each one passed through countless hands before ending up in that chest, on that ship, at the bottom of the sea. They've waited centuries for you to find them, and now they are yours, free and clear, no strings attached. You could do anything with them. You could do nothing. The freedom is almost overwhelming. The lesser-known detail that emerges from this moment is something you've never heard anyone talk about: the strange melancholy that accompanies sudden wealth. You've spent your whole life wanting, needing, struggling to get by. Now that you have more than you need, you realize that wanting was part of your identity, part of what drove you. Without it, you feel unmoored, adrift, uncertain of who you are or what you're supposed to want next. The coins are beautiful, valuable, life-changing. But they are also heavy, in ways that have nothing to do with weight. You decide, finally, to keep diving. Not because you have to, you don't, not anymore, but because you want to. Because the sea still calls to you, still holds mysteries you haven't explored, still offers the strange peace you found nowhere else. You'll dive differently now, more carefully, with better equipment and more knowledge. But you'll dive. You'll keep descending into that green world, keep walking on the seabed, keep searching for whatever else might be waiting down there. The treasure was never really about the coins. It was about the journey, the discovery, the moments of awe and terror and wonder that you can't find anywhere else. And that journey isn't over yet. The seasons turn, and you find yourself diving in waters far from that first wreck, far from the taverns and boarding houses of your early years. The silver bought you freedom, but freedom, you've discovered, is just another word for choice, and choice means deciding where to go, what to do, which risks are worth taking. You've chosen to keep diving, but you've also chosen to dive smarter, to learn from every descent, to treat each new depth as a classroom where the tuition is paid in attention rather than blood. You're in the North Sea now, working a wreck that's been buried in the cold mud for 2 centuries. The water here is different, darker, colder, more violent than the relatively calm waters where you started. The surface is rarely flat. Waves slam against the salvage vessel, making every descent a battle against motion as well as pressure. You've learned to time your dives to the swell, to descend when the ship is at the top of a wave so that the sudden drop doesn't yank your hose or change your depth too quickly. It's a skill that took years to develop, and you're still learning. The wreck is a Dutch merchantman, lost in a storm sometime in the 1600s. Its cargo was porcelain, Chinese export ware, bound for Amsterdam, now scattered across the seabed in a million fragments. But there are intact pieces too, bowls and plates and delicate teacups that somehow survived the sinking and the centuries of currents. You're here to recover them, working for a collector who pays well and asks few questions. It's legitimate work, mostly, though the legality of salvaging ancient wrecks is a gray area that you've learned not to examine too closely. You descend alone today, William being elsewhere, pursuing his studies in physiology and decompression theory. You miss his company, but you've also come to appreciate the solitude of a solo dive, the way it forces you to be completely present, completely aware, completely responsible for your own survival. The hose trails above you, your only connection to the surface, and you walk through the scattered debris of a ship that carried hopes and dreams across an ocean, only to end here, in the cold and dark. The porcelain is beautiful even in the dim light. You pick up a bowl, its surface encrusted with marine growth, and rub away enough to see the blue and white pattern beneath. A dragon, maybe, or a landscape, it's hard to tell through the fog of centuries. You tuck it into your bag and keep moving, your eyes scanning the seabed for more. This is the kind of diving that rewards patience, that asks you to slow down and look closely, that teaches you to see what others would miss. Historians still argue whether the commercial salvage of historic wrecks is preservation or exploitation. On one hand, without salvors like you, many of these artifacts would remain buried forever, slowly decaying into nothing. On the other hand, the context of a wreck, the way objects relate to each other, the story they tell together, is lost when they're pulled up piece by piece and sold to collectors. You've heard both arguments, and you're not sure where you stand. All you know is that the porcelain is beautiful, and that holding it makes you feel connected to the past in a way that nothing else does. The lesser-known detail about diving in cold water is how it changes your relationship with time. In warm waters, you can stay down for hours, your body comfortable, your mind clear. In the North Sea, every minute is a battle against the cold that seeps through your suit, numbs your fingers, slows your thoughts. You learn to work quickly, efficiently, to prioritize the most valuable finds and leave the rest. You learn to listen to your body, to recognize the early signs of hypothermia before they become dangerous. And you learn that sometimes the most valuable thing you can bring up is yourself, even if the bags are empty. You've been down for nearly an hour when you feel the first tug of the signal line, a reminder that your time is running out. You tug back, acknowledging, and begin the slow process of gathering your finds and preparing to ascend. The decompression stops are longer here, because the water is deeper, and you've learned to plan for them, to use the waiting time to rest and recover before the final push to the surface. You rise slowly, pausing at each prescribed depth, and you watch the light change as you approach the world above. When you break the surface, the waves are higher than when you descended. The salvage vessel pitches and rolls, and the crew has to work quickly to haul you aboard before a wave slams you against the hull. You land on the deck gasping, your body trembling with cold, but you're alive, and the bag of porcelain is intact, and that's enough. The crew helps you out of your suit, wraps you in blankets, presses hot drinks into your hands. You sit there, shivering, watching the gray sky and the gray sea, and you think about how strange it is that this is what you chose. This cold, this danger, this constant struggle against the elements. You could be anywhere, doing anything, but you're here, because here is where you belong. Years pass, and the diving changes. The equipment improves, better suits, more reliable pumps, helmets with larger viewports that let you actually see where you're going. The knowledge expands too, as men like William publish their findings and decompression tables become standard equipment rather than guesswork. You dive less often now, having trained a new generation of divers who carry on the work you started, but you still descend when the mood takes you, when the sea calls and you can't say no. You're in the Mediterranean now, working on a wreck that's been there since Roman times. The water is warm and clear, a stark contrast to the North Sea's cold murk, and you can see for dozens of feet in every direction. The wreck is scattered across the seabed, amphorae, mostly, their pointed ends buried in the sand, their bodies encrusted with the growth of 2 millennia. You swim among them, weightless in the warm water, and you feel the weight of history pressing down on you in a way that has nothing to do with pressure. The amphorae once held wine, or oil, or grain, the staples of an empire that stretched across the known world. Now they hold only seawater and the small creatures that have made them home. You select one, carefully, checking for cracks before you attempt to move it. These are fragile, despite their apparent solidity, and you've learned that the most valuable artifacts are often the most delicate. You'll bring this one up, and it will end up in a museum somewhere, labeled and dated and displayed behind glass, a relic of a world that vanished long before you were born. You work slowly, methodically, the way you've learned to work over decades of diving. Each amphora requires attention, respect, an understanding of how it's held in the sediment and how it will respond to being moved. You've seen divers ruin artifacts by rushing, by treating them as objects rather than as connections to the past. You won't make that mistake. Not now, not after everything you've learned. The sun filters down through the clear water, dappling the seabed with light. You look up and see the surface as a shimmering ceiling, impossibly distant despite being only 60 feet above. The hose trails behind you, a modern convenience that would have seemed like magic to the sailors who died here 2,000 years ago. You wonder what they would think if they could see you now, a creature from the future, breathing through a tube, walking on the seabed where their ship came to rest. Would they be amazed? Terrified? Or would they simply accept you as another mystery of the deep, another strange phenomenon in a world full of them? Historians still argue whether the ancient mariners who sailed these waters had any concept of diving as you practice it. There are records of sponge divers, of pearl fishers, of men who held their breath and descended to remarkable depths. But the idea of breathing underwater, of carrying your own atmosphere with you into the deep, that would have seemed like fantasy, the stuff of myths and legends. And yet, here you are, living that fantasy, breathing air pumped from a boat that floats on the same surface where their ship foundered. The irony isn't lost on you. The lesser-known detail about Mediterranean diving is the temperature. Even in summer, even in these warm latitudes, the water at depth is colder than you expect. The sun's warmth doesn't penetrate far, and below 30 feet you're in a world of perpetual chill. You've learned to wear a thicker suit here, to accept the discomfort as part of the price of admission. It's worth it, though, for the clarity, for the visibility, for the chance to see history spread out before you like a banquet. You select a second amphora, then a third, building a small collection that you'll bring up in stages. The work is meditative, almost hypnotic, and you lose yourself in it completely. Your breathing slows, your movements become automatic, and you're no longer a man from the 19th century diving in the Mediterranean. You're just a presence, a witness, a pair of eyes observing the remains of a world that ended before your ancestors were born. A tug on the line brings you back. Your time is running out, as it always does, and you begin the slow ascent, pausing at each decompression stop to let your body adjust. The amphorae rise with you, their ancient clay catching the light, and you wonder who will hold them next, what stories they'll tell, what future generations will make of these remnants of the past. You'll never know, of course. You'll be gone, replaced by other divers, other explorers, other seekers of the deep. But that's okay. That's how it should be. The sea doesn't belong to you, it never did. You're just passing through, a visitor from the surface, privileged to see what most will never see. You break the surface and the crew helps you aboard, lifting the amphorae with the same care you used to select them. They are beautiful, even encrusted with millennia of marine growth, and you can imagine them cleaned and restored, taking their place in some museum's collection. You strip off your helmet and breathe the warm Mediterranean air, and you feel, for the first time in a long time, at peace. The evening finds you on the deck of the salvage vessel, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. The water has turned to gold, then to rose, then to a deep purple that matches the darkening sky. You sit with a glass of wine, local, ordinary, nothing like what the amphorae once held, and you let your mind drift over the decades of diving, the hundreds of descents, the countless moments of awe and terror and wonder that have filled your life beneath the waves. The crew has gone ashore, seeking entertainment in the coastal town whose lights you can see flickering in the distance. You've stayed behind, preferring the company of the sea to the noise of the tavern. It's a preference that's grown stronger over the years, this need for solitude, for the quiet presence of the water. You've become something of a hermit, the crew thinks, though they are too respectful to say it to your face. Maybe they are right. Maybe you have. But if so, it's a hermitage you've chosen willingly, gratefully, with no regrets. You think about William, about the boy who nearly died and became a man who changed diving forever. His book on decompression theory is standard reading now, required for anyone who wants to dive seriously. He's respected, honored, invited to speak at conferences and universities. You see him occasionally, when your paths cross, and he always greets you with the same warmth, the same gratitude, the same unspoken acknowledgement that without that day on the seabed, none of it would have happened. You don't talk about it. You don't need to. Some things are understood without words. You think about all the other divers you've known, the ones who survived, the ones who didn't, the ones who quit and found other lives, the ones who kept diving until the sea finally claimed them. Each one taught you something, even the ones who taught you only what to avoid. You carry them with you, all of them, their voices echoing in your memory when you descend into the deep. You've become a repository of stories, a living archive of diving history, and sometimes you wonder who will remember them when you're gone. Historians still argue whether the 19th century was the golden age of diving or just its awkward adolescence. The equipment was primitive, the knowledge was incomplete, and the death rate was appalling by modern standards. But there was also a spirit of exploration, a willingness to take risks, a sense that anything was possible if you were brave enough to try. The divers of this era were pioneers, pushing into a world that had never been seen by human eyes, and they did it with equipment that would make a modern diver laugh, or run screaming in the opposite direction. You're proud to have been one of them, proud to have contributed, in your small way, to the opening of the deep. The lesser-known detail that comes to you now, sitting in the twilight, is how few of the early divers kept journals or wrote down their experiences. Most of them were illiterate, or nearly so, and their stories died with them. The ones that survive, the published accounts, the official reports, the occasional letter home, represent only a fraction of what was actually experienced. The rest is lost, sunk into the same deep that claimed so many of the divers themselves. You've tried to remember, to preserve, to pass on what you've learned to the younger divers who seek you out. But you know it's not enough. The sea always takes more than it gives. You finish your wine and set the glass aside. The stars are coming out now, bright and sharp in the clear Mediterranean sky. You lie back on the deck, using a coiled rope as a pillow, and you watch them wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of even the bravest diver, the universe continues its slow dance, indifferent to the small dramas played out on this tiny planet. It's a comforting thought, in its way. Your struggles, your triumphs, your fears, all of them are insignificant in the cosmic scale. And yet, they matter. They matter to you, to the people you've loved, to the divers who will come after and benefit from what you've learned. That's enough. That has to be enough. You close your eyes and let the gentle motion of the ship rock you toward sleep. Tomorrow you'll dive again, descending into the clear water to recover more amphorae, more fragments of the past. But tonight, you rest. Tonight, you let the sea hold you, not as a diver but as a passenger, a guest, a child of the surface floating on the skin of the deep. It's a good feeling, a peaceful feeling, and you savor it while it lasts. You wake to the sound of the crew preparing for the day's work, their voices carrying across the deck in the early morning light. For a moment you're disoriented, unsure where you are, a common feeling after decades of moving from ship to ship, port to port, wreck to wreck. Then the familiar motion of the vessel registers, and the smell of the sea, and you remember. The Mediterranean. The amphorae. Another day of diving ahead. You rise slowly, your body protesting in ways it didn't when you were young. The joints ache, the muscles are stiff, and there's a persistent twinge in your shoulder that's been there for years now, a souvenir from a dive gone wrong in the North Sea. You work through it, as you always do, moving carefully until the stiffness eases and you can stand upright without too much discomfort. Age, you've learned, is just another hazard of the profession, one that creeps up on you slowly, inevitably, no matter how careful you are. The crew greets you with the usual mixture of respect and familiarity. You're the old man now, the veteran, the one who's been diving since before most of them were born. They listen when you speak, ask your advice on equipment and techniques, treat you with a deference that you find slightly embarrassing but have learned to accept. You were once the young one, eager and foolish, learning from the old divers in taverns and on decks just like this one. Now you're the old diver, and the young ones come to you. The circle turns. Today's dive will be your last on this wreck, at least for now. You've recovered most of the intact amphorae, and the remaining fragments are better left to the archaeologists who will eventually come to study the site. You'll make one more descent, a final visit to say goodbye, and then you'll move on to whatever comes next. There's always something next, another wreck, another sea, another chance to descend into the deep and see what's waiting there. You suit up slowly, savoring the familiar ritual. The wool undergarments, thick and warm despite the Mediterranean climate. The heavy canvas suit, stiff with use but still sound. The copper helmet, polished to a dull gleam by years of handling. The tender checks each connection, each valve, each seal, and you nod your approval. You've trained them well, these young men, and you trust them with your life. That trust is the greatest gift they can give you, and you accept it gratefully. The descent is as familiar as breathing. The ladder, the water rising around you, the sudden transition from the world of air to the world of water. You release the rungs and sink slowly, weightless, toward the seabed 60 feet below. The clarity of the water still amazes you, even after all these years. The way the light filters down, the way the bottom comes into focus gradually, the way the amphorae appear like sentinels guarding the wreck. You land softly, your boots settling into the sand, and you take a moment to simply be here, to feel the weight of the water and the presence of the past. The wreck stretches out before you, its secrets mostly revealed but still holding a few mysteries. You walk among the amphorae, your hand trailing over their surfaces, and you think about the hands that made them, the hands that filled them, the hands that loaded them onto a ship that would never reach its destination. All those hands, all those lives, reduced to this, fragments of clay on a seabed, waiting for someone to notice them. You notice. You've always noticed. It's what you do. You've brought nothing with you today, no bags or tools, because this dive isn't about recovery. It's about presence, about witness, about saying goodbye. You walk the length of the wreck, from the bow, which is mostly buried, to the stern, where the rudder still stands upright after 2,000 years. You touch it, feeling the wood, surprisingly solid despite its age. Then you turn and begin the slow walk back, pausing to look at the amphorae one last time before you start your ascent. Historians still argue whether the development of diving suits was a net positive for humanity or just another way for us to meddle in places we don't belong. You've thought about this question often over the years, and you still don't have a definitive answer. On one hand, diving has given you a life of wonder and discovery, a connection to the past and to the natural world that you couldn't have found anywhere else. On the other hand, you've seen what diving can do, the deaths, the injuries, the greed that sends men to their graves in pursuit of treasure that was never theirs to take. Maybe both are true. Maybe diving, like most human endeavors, is a mixture of light and shadow, beauty and horror, wisdom and folly. The lesser-known detail that comes to you now, as you begin your slow ascent, is something you've never shared with anyone. It's the feeling you get when you're deep underwater, in the silence and the dark, that you're not alone. Not in a scary way, not in a supernatural way, just in a sense that the sea is full of presences, of lives and histories and stories that you can almost hear if you listen closely enough. The fish, of course, and the other creatures. But also the wrecks themselves, the ships and their crews, the cargoes and the dreams they carried. They are still there, in some sense, lingering in the deep, waiting for someone to remember them. You've spent your life being that someone, that rememberer, that witness. And now, as you rise toward the surface for what might be the last time, you hope that someone will remember you too. You pause at each decompression stop, letting the minutes pass, letting your body adjust. The light grows brighter, the water warmer, and you can see the surface as a rippling mirror above you. You break through and the crew hauls you aboard, lifting the helmet, wrapping you in blankets. You stand on the deck, looking out at the sea, and you feel a peace that you've rarely felt before. The diving is over, for now. The deep will wait. It always waits. You've spent a lifetime beneath the waves, exploring worlds that most will never see, and now it's time to come home. The deck beneath your feet is solid, the air is warm, and the crew is already preparing for the next dive. But that dive belongs to them, not to you. Your part in this story is ending, as all stories must, and you find that you're ready. Ready to rest, ready to remember, ready to let the sea hold you in a different way. The dives will continue without you, the wrecks will yield their secrets to other hands, and the deep will keep its mysteries for those who come after. But you've done your part. You've seen what there is to see, learned what there is to learn, and returned to tell the tale. Now, as the sun sets over the Mediterranean and the stars begin to emerge, you close your eyes and let the gentle motion of the ship carry you toward sleep. The sea sings you its ancient lullaby, the same song it's sung for millennia, and you listen, and you rest, and you dream of the deep.